2025 webinar. I'm Graham Melstrand, the Executive Vice President of Community Health and Wellness for the American Council on Exercise and the past president for the Coalition for Registration of Exercise Professionals, and I will be your host for today. We have a pretty large group on today, so please use the Q&A. We'll try and make sure we have plenty of time for questions at the end, but given the size of our attendance today, we may not be able to get to all of your questions during the webinar, but we'll certainly respond to everybody afterwards. Athlete Alive 2025 represents a collaborative effort between CREP, the National Athletic Trainers Association's Intercollegiate Council on Sports Medicine, and USCA, the U.S. Council for Athletes' Health. Our goal is to significantly reduce the occurrence of preventable injuries and deaths among college athletes related to out-of-competition conditioning activities through encouraging compliance with the NCAA's interassociation recommendations for preventing catastrophic injury and death in collegiate athletes as they pertain to the strength and conditioning coaches' education, credentialing, and training. Today, we have a really distinguished panel that I'd like to introduce today, and I'm going to ask that each of the panelists do just a brief introduction, and we'll do this Hollywood Squares style, starting, Sandy, with you, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sandy Abney. I'm the Chief Science Officer for the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association, and my primary responsibility is overseeing the organization's accreditation and certification processes.
All right, thank you. Brant, you're next, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brant Borgstresser. I am the Executive Chair of the NATA's Intercollegiate Council for Sports Medicine. I'm also the Associate Athletic Director for Sports Medicine at Tarleton State University. I'm an athletic trainer. I've been involved in Division I college athletics for 30 plus years and been a director for 20 years. And thank you for the opportunity and allowing me to join and be a panelist today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Adam, please, next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Feit, and I am here in two roles. My full-time job is an assistant professor and clinical coordinator for Springfield College, where I serve in the realm of strength conditioning education and coordination with our accreditation and fieldwork process. I am also here today representing the NSCA, the National Strength Conditioning Association, which is a nonprofit association dedicated to advancing strength conditioning and all related sports science professions around the world. Thank you so much.
Right. Brian, please.
Hi, everyone. Brian Biagioli. I am currently the Graduate Program Director for Applied Physiology at the University of Miami. I am also currently the Executive Director for the National Council on Strength and Fitness Board for Certification and a Vice President here with CREP, as well as a tenured strength conditioning advisor for FIBA Europe certification.
And Dr. Borchers.
Thanks, Graham. My name is Jim Borchers. I am a sports medicine physician, a professor of medicine at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. I'm also the president and co-founder of the U.S. Council for Athletes' Health, an organization that works with institutions, organizations, and individuals to prioritize athlete health and safety. I'm also currently the chief medical officer for the Big Ten Conference.
All right, terrific. It's really an honor to have representatives from each of the organizations that offer accredited certification programs for strength coaches represented here. It's very much a collaborative effort that brought us to this point in time. So starting off with just a little bit of background, in 2017, there were some concerns and some damaging reports around athlete injuries and death while under the supervision of strength and conditioning coaches, and that led to some investigations and questions regarding the competence and the qualifications of those individuals working as strength coaches, leading to lawsuits and a call to action for the development of a set of universal recommendations to address the deficits. Brian, why don't we start with you? Can you provide a little background on the work that brought us to where we are today? Thinking of kind of one of the seminal events being that 2012 Sudden Death Consortium that was led by the Corey Springer Institute, and then, of course, the interassociation recommendations for best practices in strength and conditioning.
Sure. In 2012, there was a leadership group that came together and came up with some really good recommendations and guidelines related to the prevention of catastrophic injury. And even though that was done and published and is presented on the NCAA website, we still had this history of catastrophic injury and death. In fact, once we were invited to start looking into these things and work on the project for the NCAA, I went to the NCAA website under the Sports Science Institute and looked at football specifically to start with. And we identified there had been since prior to 2020, there was some 32 deaths, much of which many people hadn't even heard about. So we did a little bit of digging and identified, well, not one of the strength and conditioning coaches who was involved in any of the processes related to any of those deaths actually was certified by the National Strength and Conditioning Association, the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Association, or the National Council of Strength and Fitness. So looking at that, we said, okay, let's take a look broader into this beyond certification. What would be the ideal recommendations for professional development in this space? And what we did was analyze what the thoughts were of the key stakeholders, including the practitioners themselves. So we had different collegiate strength and conditioning coaches as well as professional strength and conditioning coaches involved. We had employers, which was primarily athletic directors across all the different divisions. And we had academic advisors who came from education programs that were developed specifically around strength and conditioning or applied exercise physiology and exercise science. And what we found was amongst those surveys was that there was a lot of consistency. And so it allowed us to form the actual recommendations. And following the formation of those recommendations specific to education and internship experience, proper certification processes, continued education, and ongoing professional competency, as well as the reporting structure and the ability for autonomy across strength and conditioning, we came up with those recommendations and then resurveyed them to the different populations. And what was really, I wouldn't say surprising, but it was a pleasant response in that nearly 100% of all the people who were resurveyed, who participated in this, agreed with the recommendations as they were written. And so I think that speaks, a lot towards there is a powerful group supporting these things. And all we have to do is just move everything in the right direction, get people on board.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Borchers, besides the lawsuits that, are frequently the results of these wrongful deaths, what other issues does an institution need to be concerned about?
Well, I think, Graham, as we think about where we sit today in 2023 and what established best practice and standard of care is, I think it's important to recognize that these interassociation recommendations, there was support not only from the organizations represented here, but really from every major sports medicine organization, including the NATA, AMSSM, AOSSM. You can just go on and on about the groups that, as Brian said, supported this. But I think that number one, if you're an NCAA institution, for example, these are required. These are not optional. And so if you're not doing that, in some ways, you're negligent towards your association's requirements. And as professionals, if you are not meeting the expectations of your profession, just as an athletic trainer or physician would not be for continuing education for board certification, now you're an individual that really is not certified or, in a position to be able to practice appropriately. And if you're an institution and you have those individuals, you're now complicit, just as a hospital system would be, of employing an individual that's not certified to be able to work in that space. And I think the real challenge for institutions is to recognize that in this field, there certainly are a set of standards that have been established. And by and large, the professionals in this field want to make certain that folks recognize that they are meeting those standards. And I think it's important to help them. But there is an inherent risk if you're an institution, not only a risk to the institutional reputation, but a risk to the student athlete, a risk to the individual that is involved in the activity. And so I think that, a lot of times in these situations, people want to know, well, who's the enforcer? In this situation, the enforcement is the society that we live in and what we have established as standard of care and best practice.
Thank you for that. Brent, you're in a unique position. So you wear actually two hats where you work. One is the associate athletic director, and the other is the athletic trainer. As a participant in this initiative, how important are these recommendations to the athlete welfare team?
Well, they're obviously significant. Ultimately, whether you're an athletic trainer, you're a healthcare professional, whether you're a strength and conditioning coach, a sport coach, etc. Ultimately, the student athlete health, well-being, and safety has to be that is part of your responsibility. And ultimately for me, who's an associate AD, obviously has a voice directly to our vice president for intercollegiate athletics. There are things that I am empowered with, and one of those empowerments is obviously the overall health and safety of our student athletes. And so ultimately, there needs to be a holistic approach to how care is being performed on your collegiate campuses. And that can be structured in many different ways, and that's not necessarily what this talk is about. But what it does mean is there has to be open lines of communication between my department from the sports medicine standpoint, our athletic performance staff. That's what, our strength and conditioning area, they want to refer to themselves as our athletic performance coaches. So there has to be direct lines of communication. There has to be collaborations on how policies and guidelines are developed when things intersect between the two. And I got to Tarleton about 1.5 years ago. There were a lot of things that either had to be revised or developed from a sports medicine standpoint. And those things that kind of cross boundaries with our athletic performance staff, they were part of that collaboration and development, even to the essence of, at that point in time, there really wasn't a policy around the implementation of and design of athletic performance for strength and conditioning activities on our campus. There was inherent things that our athletic performance and director of athletic performance had, but it wasn't necessarily written down. And so collectively, we developed those guidelines. And then there has to be the communication to your administration, your VP, for our case, our VP for athletics, and education to the coaches. Ultimately, it comes down to culture, that there is a foundation of how these services are going to be carried out and how they are integrated between medicine, performance, and the actual sports skill.
So in your case, did you find developing those policies and procedures and memorializing those in writing so that they were consistent? Was that really the goal for you with that?
Yeah, and I will say this, it was not a hard task to do. But I think the other important piece to this is that it put things on paper in the essence that if you had a coach that didn't necessarily follow the protocols that were at least communicated previously and not having written down guidelines, you have accountability, right? And that's part of it. Now there's a means of accountability. If a coach does something on their own that would be against proper periodization protocols, transition periods, et cetera, or how from the overall administrative aspect of what our expectation from our VP down on how athletic performance is going to run at Tarleton.
Sure. So the perform to what you measure is really the underlying theme there. Adam, with these interassociation recommendations for the strength coaches, they dealt with three kind of the pre-credentialing, the credentialing, and then the continuing education requirement. And some of the things that really stood out in terms of the feedback that we got with the survey was the importance of appropriate academic preparation, relevant internship experience. Can you talk a little bit about what organizations like the NSCA are doing to make sure that those academic programs that provide the runway into the strength coaching profession are helping further further the space.
Absolutely. So in my role as the strength conditioning coordinator, when we're talking about academic preparation, I think over the years, since its inception in the late 70s or whatnot, we have seen an increased divide in what our current students are learning and what's actually being applied in the field. And so I commend the large governing bodies and these open conversations that we've had with other associations to ensure that our students and tomorrow's leader in the field of strength conditioning and athletic performance aren't simply just regurgitating information that maybe was memorized in class, but can actually demonstrate those competencies and skills in this real life application model. And so a measure that the NCAA has taken is that by 2030, individuals that are going to receive an education from an accredited organization through our Council of Accreditation on Strength Conditioning Education will be eligible to sit for the certification of the Certified Strength Conditioning Specialist. This creates a lot of opportunities and numerous factors and stakeholders in the argument. This ensures that individuals that are earning the certification through the NCAA have come from an accredited program, which, as some of our other individuals have explained earlier, includes not just knowledge learned in the classroom, but actual field experience with people in the field. And so as we continue to try and bridge that gap from that classroom to the weight room, to the turf, and to the athletic fields, it really sets the standard that much higher to ensure that they are getting hours and hundreds of hours of actual mentored experience. And if I may, I also am a member of the CSCCA, and I know Sandy and her team has done a great job on their end of making sure that they are being paired up with a mentor, and they're getting that hundreds of hours of actual experience. So don't want to speak on terms of that, and I know that's her role there, but as somebody that is a dual member of both large governing bodies and strength conditioning education, we are learning that education simply isn't enough if we're truly here to maximize athletic performance and reduce the risk and severity of future injury, which can be done with proper field work experiences.
Thank you. And Sandy, where I'd like you to weigh in on this is really thinking about the perishable skills and the required ongoing continuing education. A lot of focus tends to be on the practice of, but one of the things that these recommendations identified was that there were certain perishable skills that were really aligned with what the athletic trainers are working on, the practice around the emergency drills and those type of things and the procedures. Could you speak a little bit to that? Because I think sometimes people don't understand the value of those perishable skills and the refresher that you would have each year for all of the individuals that are working on the and athletic training and medical care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, we were very pleased to see the recommendations come down with an annual health and safety CEU. We feel like that needs to be on the forefront of every coach's mind. And this is something that can't just be a one and done. It has to be something that is practiced and rehearsed. So encouraging emergency action plans, practicing the emergency action plans, working through continuing education units to further develop your skill sets and your knowledge and your professional growth and development in the health and safety arena to empower you to have the knowledge and skills to lay out programming that helps in preventing, catastrophic death, so those things we take very seriously. We're very pleased to see that come down. One thing for strength and conditioning coaches and anyone else working with student athletes to understand is that the research clearly shows us that transition times are the most vulnerable, and it's the highest risk of non-traumatic death in student athletes. And so this time, coaches need to understand their athletes are extremely vulnerable, and it is of the utmost importance that they are using sound scientific principles when they're laying out their programming to protect the student athlete.
Thank you. Dr. Borchers, could we have you weigh in on that from wearing both of your hats, that is a physician and in the role that USCA serves, and then Brant, if you could comment on the importance of the alignment of those educational pieces between the strength coaches and the athletic trainers.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in there, Graham, since you asked. I think that the reality of this is exactly what Sandy said, is that, look, just like with many other professions, and to hear her talk about not being the one and done, that just doesn't exist, right? That's not called for in any standard of care or best practice. And so as an individual, you have to make certain that you're meeting the recommendations. And I think that the reality of that is we have to make certain that professionals have those opportunities and have the opportunities to do that. When you talk about alignment with medical professionals, the recommendations call for that. And medical professionals are required to do the same. And so we want to make certain that there's good alignment, all in the interest of making certain that the health and safety of the athlete is, at the forefront of what we're trying to accomplish. We know that healthy athletes perform best, so we should want to keep them healthy and not put them in situations where they could suffer, obviously, catastrophic injury, and certainly not in situations of death. And Sandy mentioned transition periods and other, critical times where we need to look at when these incidents occur. But this is the reality. And I think this is really straightforward. If you're not doing this, if you're a professional, if you're in this space, then you're not meeting the best practice and the standard of care that's been put out there. And it's been endorsed. And all of these organizations endorse. And so what we're trying to say today, I think, is that we want to make certain that professionals are being able to exhibit to their constituents that they are meeting those best practices. It's what we want our medical professionals to do. It's certainly what strength and conditioning professionals want to do. And it's really incumbent on all of us to make certain that we come together to talk about how important it is. And that's why I'm so impressed with the group that's here today.
Thank you. And Brant, additional thoughts from you, because the athletic trainer usually ends up being that first responder when something untoward does happen on the practice field, and it certainly creates an additional pressurized environment at that point. So from your perspective, wearing that hat, and the ICSM's perspective, why do you think it's so important?
Well, and we just keep hitting it in, but it's the reality. It's ultimately, to the health and safety of the student athlete, and we're all responsible for, creating an environment that our student athletes have trust, faith in, and believe ultimately they are going to be pushed, and they all want to be pushed, and they want to be pushed to a limit. But we understand where that boundary of that limit is. And, Dr. Borges has talked about, from an NCAA perspective, right, this is a legislative action. You have to follow it. I would also say I'm not a lawyer, but if you're an athletic association outside of the NCAA, this still has the potential to be a standard that you may be held against if you are in a court of law. And so ultimately, whether you may or may not be an NCAA institution, this is still probably an operating standard that you should be concerned about and ultimately should be following. And again, from my perspective, it really comes down to culture. It just comes down to that working relationship that you have with your strength and conditioning coach, you kind of have with your sport coaches. Again, as an NCAA institution, there are things that I am, or my staff, or the institution, I should say, and it falls on me as the healthcare administrator, but we are responsible for educating our athletic performance staff, our sport coaches. And a lot of it is on the information that we are talking about here. That has to be done in an annual basis. We will be with the new Division I transformation report. We will be signing an attestation that we are doing those things. So there is some sort of accountability that we have to carry out these things. All right. And so it comes forth again in educating our administration. These things have to be done. We have to provide this culture that is promoting these items that we are talking about, but that holistically we are valuing and how we are going to support our student athletes.
Adam, Brian, additional thoughts?
Go ahead, Adam.
Thanks, Brian. I really love where this conversation is heading. And I think one of the biggest components that we're seeing an evolution in strength conditioning, athletic performance, and really the general health and safety of the athlete is the implementation of this high performance model, where we are truly knocking down either physically or rhetorical walls, where these conversations can have with our athletic care team, with sports psychology, with sport nutrition, and of course our athletic performance and strength conditioning team. And so I think we should look at this as an opportunity to continue these conversations, but also to have enhanced accountability. And instead of a simple memo or an email or maybe an in-service, how we can continue to provide this type of education, encourage these stakeholders, our athletic directors, our academics, our athletic trainers, and our strength and conditioning coaches to maybe step outside their environment of comfortableness and actually see how it looks like on the other end. So as we continue to connect these dots and have these open conversations to continue to act on it and move it forward so that we are all on truly the same page for the betterment of that student athlete.
Thank you, Brian.
So I'm going to underscore what everyone's saying here. From the National Center on Catastrophic Sport Injury Research at UNC, I actually have the tables and figures right here in front of me. And so when we have this consideration, and I'm talking, protection for all athletes, but just to show you the difference that we can see from college and high school readiness. In 2016 to 2017, we had 33 all-cause deaths in college and 56 deaths in high school. In 2017, 2018, it was 24 and 65 respectively, equaling almost 90 deaths associated with sports participation at the high school and collegiate level. And that number increases going down the path. And in looking at these situations, it's almost always consistent with an inadequate readiness, a level of disparity amongst leader relevant competency, and the specific resources that are afforded the group that has to act on these particular situations. And so we need to categorize this, again, to underscore what everyone's saying is we have to look at it from readiness at physical screening. We have to look at it from a program development perspective, program implementation, and then incident management. And if we act like professionals and we do the things that we're supposed to do, following best practices, we can reduce those numbers significantly. And, we're not asking strength and conditioning to be any different than athletic training or physical therapy or, registered dietitians. It's just, a commitment to your professional activities.
Thank you. This next question is really for the group, because one of the things that I think is most interesting that came out of those interassociation recommendations was a recommendation for autonomy from the sports coach for the strength and conditioning coaches. So to move them in a position similar to what you have with the athletic trainer and the medical director or physician at a university where they have they have the autonomy to make the decisions that are the right ones for the student athlete and for their optimal performance on the field of play. Can we talk a little bit about why that's so important and perhaps provide some examples of how without that we can end up with some of these unintended consequences in athlete injuries and deaths? Sandy, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. While you were talking, it was making me think of, several instances that I'm familiar with where strength and conditioning professionals were directly tied to their sport coach and were hesitant for fear of losing their jobs and making, their own decisions and best judgment about what should be going on the practice field during conditioning sessions. And in some cases, we've had members lose their jobs because they did stand up to the coach. So, to your point, exactly, working with the autonomy, you have to have the professional to be able to work independently and not fear in losing their employment because they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, Sandy, Graham, if I can jump in here for just a second, I think that there's a couple things here that are so critical. I think number one, the principle of independent medical care, as Brant mentioned, is one of the 5 principles that athletic healthcare administrators will have to attest to in Division I, which says that medical providers have autonomy to make decisions in the best interest of the health and safety of an individual. And that is directly reflected to sport performance, strength and conditioning professionals as well. They need to have the ability to make decisions that, are in the best interest of the health and safety of individuals. In a recent survey we did with, folks in Division I that are athletic healthcare administrators, out of 160 respondents, 100 of them approximately said that exercise as punishment is still used on their campus. And that's just, that goes against everything that these recommendations talk about. But I think that we've heard, as Sandy mentioned, that directive usually comes from a sport coach, usually through a strength and conditioning coach or exercise professional. And so I think it just underscores the need to make certain that there's the ability for autonomous decision making and discussion around why we need to make these decisions and how we need to protect the health and safety of athletes. And it doesn't mean that you can't train hard. It doesn't mean that you can't coach someone hard. It means that we've got to do it in a collective environment, as we've heard many people talk about today.
I'll this
Please.
one. Oh, thank you. Jim, I appreciate that. And I'll put my sports psychology professional lens on now. This idea of autonomy, it's one of the 3 basic psychological needs that all humans strive for to maximize inner motivation. We have autonomy, we have the ability to demonstrate competence, and then we're part of something greater than ourselves with relatedness. And I think if we scale back and look at this idea of autonomy, like Brian talked about, challenging our own narratives, too much autonomy can be a very bad and deadly thing. The research has supported this idea of choice overload, where if there is too much autonomy given, those individuals with that unlimited choice or excessive choice are left in matters where they may not be doing the best thing for that student athlete or the decision makers in their organizations. And so for me, this is a call to action for those in the hiring processes and the administrative roles, as well as interdepartment relations, to what are those checks and balances? And while we want to recognize and appreciate autonomy so that they can demonstrate that competence, a big piece of this is also accountability from within ourselves, from within our own team members, but also those overseeing stakeholders that are truly going through the list of hiring, not who knows who, but also who demonstrates the highest level of competence. And to Sandy's point, that will not fear doing the right thing at a jeopardy of losing their job. So the idea of autonomy is very much appreciated. Myself, as a current private sector coach, a former NFL and Division I coach, I appreciate that, but I also know that autonomy has to be earned. And I know that I am accountable to not only the people of my own family, but those that I serve as well.
And Adam, real quickly, it's such a great point, because in medicine, that's exactly how it operates, right? Individuals have autonomy, but they have oversight. And they have to intimately work with others within their profession. I think as well as anyone, as an accomplished professional in the strength and conditioning space, the ability to get an athlete back to play, to be able to integrate appropriately with the, return from injury, for example, and where that intersection exists in that, return to play progression is so critical. And being able to do that appropriately. So I appreciate what you're saying in that there has to be oversight and there has to be accountability. Autonomy doesn't just mean that you function the way you want to function, and no one has, the ability to kind of call into question when needed to be.
Sure.
And I'll just,
go ahead,
Adam,
Brandon.
Yeah, I'll just chime in, Adam. I think that was great as well. And I think it just really kind of goes back that you really just have to have that culture and leadership from who is leading your athletic department, and making sure all of the parties understand who is accountable for what role that they play in their operation. And from that standpoint, that's going to give the decision making to your strength and conditioning personnel, that if they feel like, we may be getting to the point where we're crossing that line of this may not be appropriate, to be able to hold back and be able to stand up if there is pressure, because they know if this comes and goes to the director of athletics, the director of athletics is going to support them, because they are the professional in that realm. And that is the important piece.
Thank you so much. So at the brass tacks, at the ground level, how does this impact athlete health in a positive way?
I'll speak from the recruiting standpoint. So, we're now in the active recruiting season after our fall sports on campus. And as an academic, I'm constantly involved in those communications and presentations. I attribute it to the 3 E's, as I like to call it, but it's at the ground level. How do we support individuals joining our community, whether it's an organization or university? What does that education look like? Parents, peace of mind and safety and security, they are allowing their children to make that decision. What is going to be in the best interest of them and their performance? What does the education of that staff look like? So this really creates a very nice conversation about, I'm leaving my children with you. Do you have the education to actually supervise, to write, and actually bring them to another level? The second piece, I think, there is the experience. What type of experience are our health and fitness professionals at that ground level? What type of experience are they providing for those students, not only during their time there, but also their time after? How are we providing that amazing, and what would be the 30, the environment that is completely supportive, it is facilitative, and is really done in the best interest of what is best for the student and the athlete there. So at that ground level, it really comes down to, how is this message being communicated, but also how is it being implemented? And I think we talk about 360-degree leadership. How can we lead within ourselves? How can we lead others? How can we lead those below us? And how can we lead those above us? And if we continue to have this transparency between our administrators, our sport coaches, and our academics, it really creates a very nice environment that we can all work together to support the common goal.
Thank you so much. And just
if I
wanted
can-
to jump in real quick, Brian. We are getting some questions that are coming in on the Q&A, so we'll make sure we leave plenty of time for those here at the end. So sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to kind of add on to what Adam was saying. So we met with the National Parent Teachers Association regarding concerns about what the actual parents know about who's working with their kids. And the representative stated that it was a serious concern. And so I think we really need to amplify this concern, because many parents just assume that whoever is responsible for their children have gone through these processes that we're talking about. And when I talk to, student athletes at the collegiate level, it's very consistent. They have this expectation that there's going to be a high level of competency and capability. Now, I will tell you this from the positive perspective. When we did the surveys, we had 880 strength and conditioning professionals, and of them, 85% had one or more of the credentials that we're talking about today, and foundational education that supported it. And so one of the things, particularly to athletic directors and employers out there, but also to the strength and conditioning professionals themselves, if you hold one of the respective certifications from the CSCCA, the NCSF, or the NSCA, you can go to US Reps, put my US Reps hat on now. You can go to US Reps right now and identify that you are a qualified professional under that certification competency. And we are also adding some more robustness to this to identify the criteria that's specifically identified in those recommendations.
So this again, it goes out to the group. So, and it's a nice transition. Recommendations are important and requirements are important, but broad adoption is critical to success on this. And we're trying to accomplish this in a timely fashion. That's the purpose of this Athlete Alive 2025 initiative. How do we drive adoption and compliance?
Well, Graham, I would just say it's professional expectation, right? It's how do professionals want to identify themselves? It's when you think of a strength and conditioning professional, what is the expectation from not only the constituent that's working with them, but the people that work around them? And I think as a profession, I applaud, the supporting organizations, US Rep, C-Rep, to engage in this type of initiative, because what you're saying is that our individuals expect to be identified as people that meet this requirement around health, safety, and well-being. And that's exactly the way to drive this, in my opinion, is that individuals need to own that responsibility. And then the people that work with them and the people that are hiring them, just as they do other professionals, and Brant knows this from working with the athletic trainers or physicians, there's an expectation that you hold this, and it's not optional. And I think once it starts at the profession and from supporting organizations, it becomes something that's expected. And I think that very quickly we're going to be, going to be seeing that you'll have to answer this question, and you should want to answer this question. It needs to be a transparency, and it needs to be something that becomes part of the conversation at any level of sport. This is not just a Division I college expectation. It's an expectation as any athletic trainer or physician or any other professional who needs to be appropriately certified and having appropriate continuing education has, regardless of the level of athlete they're working with.
Graham, I would also just state, from an institutional organizational standpoint, you actually you make this part of the job description of the employee. And that's one way to just do it as an institution.
Sure. There's multiple stakeholders that are involved in this. There's the bottom up. We're talking to strength coaches that are on the webinar today. We're talking to athletic directors and associate athletic directors at that. So we have a top down and a bottom up approach. Adam, you raised another stakeholder in this that's important, and that's the parents and the prospective athletes as they're being recruited. How do we reach them? That kind of piqued my interest because my daughter is a Division I athlete, and I watched with keen interest what the sports coaches and the strength and conditioning coaches and the AT staff were doing when she came in, because it was happening concurrently with this initiative.
Yeah, I think and I'll speak from the lens of being in an academic setting right now. I think this is a coordinated effort between even more stakeholders. This is a coordinated effort between our undergraduate admissions department, what separates your institution, and then tying that into the athletic department in terms of the drip campaigns, whether they're weekly emails, whether it's to the on-site recommendations or open houses. I think at the end of the day, students want to come to your institution, and Graham, to use your daughter as an example, it is a process of selling what makes this the great place. But are we operating all together, or are we all in different boats trying to row in the same direction? And so I think it opens up a conversation again. What can happen with the athletic department? What can happen with the academic department? What can happen with the marketing department? How can we get that information out there sooner, but also make it very appropriate and specific to those individuals that are having that conversation? If that's a webinar like this, if it's an open information session or something that can be done from the university organizational website, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities of reminding them, as I say, what puts the U in unique, what makes this institution or organization unique. And this is going to be a big part of that conversation if we can start early and do it often.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple different stakeholder groups here that have different perspectives on this, that are serving as our subject matter experts. And I think, Adam, one of the things that you just alluded to is what type of resources can we provide to support that. So Ryan mentioned earlier that we have the U.S. Registry of Exercise Professionals that can be used for the professionals and their prospective or current employers to verify the credentials. Dr. Borchers, your organization is involved in not only supplying education and training across all of the different job roles that exist within the athletic departments and things, but you also do some consulting that helps around compliance. And Brant, you actually built those things on your own. What are those things that we collectively might be able to prepare, particularly looking at the strength and conditioning credentialing organizations for your certified, for your prospective certified, for them to be able to carry to the institutions that employ them to spread the word on this?
So I guess rephrase what you're asking there.
Yes. Are there things that we could create that would be tangible educational or informational pieces targeting specific stakeholders that would help awareness and help gain traction?
Yeah, so I think so. Actually, a resource we have on the NATA's Intercollegiate Council for Sports Medicine page is best practices for strength and conditioning. So it talks a little bit about some of the things collectively we did along with CREP, and some of the data that Brian's kind of talked about and presented here. There are some other resources, regarding transition practices, things like that. There are obviously resources on the NCAA page. I think from, an actual accreditation standpoint, that's good. That's really a collective effort between the strength and conditioning certification agencies. If they really wanted to go down the road of trying to actually find or go through the specific parameters of having accreditation and working with an accreditation body for those types of things. I don't know if I specifically asked your question, but feel free to follow up.
Other thoughts?
Well, let me tag on that with what we're doing with CREP and the US reps. We are doing a voluntary audit of the different institutions. So we're sending out surveys to the actual athletic directors to identify are all of their professionals in compliance? And if not, what is the plan to get everybody in compliance? I will tell you this. I do not think it is a huge resource drain for entry-level certification and continued education. When we compare it to other professions, it's a low bar to entry from a resource perspective, but you do have to have the requisite competencies, obviously, to pass the examinations. And there is a consistency across all the organizations. I actually participated in the national international mapping of the competency across all the different examinations, and we're looking at like a 96 to 90% overlap in the content. So, it's identify what organization works for you and go through the processes of getting prepared and properly educated and certified, and then engage in that ongoing continued education Dr. Borsch was talking about before.
Yeah, and I think, Graham, from my standpoint, I think where we've really been appreciative of what's happened in this space is to work with all of these organizations to try to develop the ability for individuals to meet those requirements very easily by looking to their organization and finding the continuing education that meets this standard. And I think every organization on here is endorsing this, and then I think by the use of US reps and CREP to hold yourself out as that professional and be listed on that professional registry as someone who's committed to that and meeting that responsibility is really, the step that needs to be taken.
And if I can just add to this, I think it's also important for our national governing bodies and our organizations to really engage in that internal audit process. I know I was just part of a job task analysis that many of us have been a part of with committees, but when has that been updated, and have the base responsibilities of our entry-level certifications and standards, has that changed? And I can attest that it has, with the influx of sports science and technology, with the integration of, again, psychology and nutrition. When is the last time that, if we're going to uphold our constituents to these standards, have those been updated? And so I think that helps everybody in the room, from administration down to the weight room and athletic fields, because it is ensuring that if our base level of a standard certification is being required, does it actually match up with the current demands and expectations set forth by our association, our hiring parties, and our athletes as well?
Sure. And that's part of the maturation process of any profession or occupation, is the evolution of that role, and those role delineation studies generally are done every 5 years to conform with the third-party accreditation requirements. And that's also why you have that continuing education requirement. It's not just about advancing yourself professionally, it's about maintaining current competence around how those elements change. I had one last question for the group, and it's really your perspective for the audience. Is it's important to have a call to action, not only for the groups that are presenting, but something that we want the audience and the participants in this webinar to do when they're done. How can the attendees of the webinar help spread the message?
I'll jump in here. I think for all of our viewers, anything they can do from a social media perspective, we know that social media, everybody's on it, everybody sees it, would be one way to reach out. Additionally, and grassroots, and communicating and talking with their peers about this, and hey, this is what's coming. Are you ready? These are the expectations. Talking with their supervisors, talking with anyone in administration and making them aware, this is what we as a profession are doing, and these are the standards that we want to be held to.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
this
What
is
about-
this is a top-down approach, but also a bottom-up approach. And so, just to show you the collegial aspects of this and what we're doing to kind of drive this forward, Sandy actually asked me to speak at the CSCCA convention most recently in Orlando, and I spoke to their master strength and conditioning coaches, and I said, this is a charge to you to bring up that next generation and support them in the expectations to meet these higher levels. And Sandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was extremely well received. And those are the ones, you know, that people are looking up to. Those are the ones that they're following on social media and, you know, looking to advance their own career. So, you know, I think it's two-part, Graham. One is those at the top have to, you know, make a commitment to really bringing those new strength and conditioning coaches and those entering the field and letting them know what the expectations are, but also helping them to get there.
I'll add one piece to that. Try to keep it simple as a coach, but ask better questions. If you're a parent and you are interested in getting your children involved in training, ask better questions. What does the program entail? What type of education and experiences will that professional or who you think to be a professional will actually occur? If you're an athlete, ask your coaches better questions. Open up a dialogue and understand the types of training that you are doing and why you might be doing that. We know that it is an evidence-based practice, and we're also demonstrating practice-based evidence. So get engaged in that conversation. As an administrator, if you're on this call, ask better questions, possibly in your interviewing. Talk to them about experiences and really bring to this environment that what will happen because these types of situations will be part of the daily process. And I think if we're in that position to actually charge leadership and make lasting change, again, ask better questions. While it may not affect us in the current timestamp, this situation will occur eventually. And so if we can get back to the grassroots level of are we actually asking better questions? Are we invoking thought? And are we moving towards action? I think it's a great place to start.
Thank you for that. Got about 10 minutes left for some questions, and we've got some great ones here, and I'm not going to take these in any particular order. But first one is, will certification requirements at the Division III level get tighter? Currently, a lot of, I won't name the organization, certified coaches doesn't seem appropriate. Is there a long-term plan on that? Dr. Borchers, you're probably closest to the NCAA in terms of that. Could I get you to start?
Yeah, I think number one, I would just say that, you know, the professional requirements are the professional requirements. And so there is no division specific requirement. This is a professional requirement. And so individuals are required, for example, at every level of the NCAA to meet the requirements put forward by the interassociation recommendations. So you need to meet them. And so I think this idea, and I understand that, you know, and it very specifically in the NCAA, you know, language says that whether you're a strength and conditioning specialist or a sport coach, you need to meet them. And that you need to be able to deliver the training, you know, be certified to deliver the training that you're instituting. And so I think it's to me, very straightforward. There's no specific level. There's no specific level of athlete that deserves this more than the other. It's required of everyone. And I think that, you know, that's the expectation. When can we get there? I think that, as we've heard today, it's top down and bottom up approach.
All right. Next one is an interesting one on that. And this question is, what do you say to an administration that currently doesn't employ a strength and conditioning professional and continues to rely on sport coaches to handle that load? That's for the group.
I'll chime in. That's a great question.
It is.
And that, you know, it probably exists quite commonly, you know, to be honest with you. And I think you start honestly with your risk management group on campus and, you know, go through the interassociation recommendations, which is really a legislative action. What best practices exist out there, and educate and inform what your risk management group in understanding the risk that institution has under these circumstances. And then and just ask for advice, what is our risk? How can we mitigate some of this risk, and what steps might be recommended? And I think ultimately that may be a holistic approach to try to navigate through that situation, because we all understand institutions all have different resources, but would also emphasize the essence of student athlete health and safety should be prioritized when we are looking at the resources and how we are allocating resources across our institutions.
We're really seeing that change with the high schools, with almost all schools employing an athletic trainer at this point, if they can't afford to have one, they really can't afford to have the sports. Next question, we talked with Adam a little bit about the programmatic accreditation. So this is to Sandy and Brian. Will the CSCCA and the NCSF adopt programmatic accreditation as a prerequisite for certification eligibility as well?
Well, I will hop in first, Sandy, because actually Sandy and I have worked on some of these things through the COAES, it's Committee on Accreditation for Exercise Science Committee under CAHEP. And what we've done, and the NCAA is part of this too, is, as I was mentioning before, that was part of the mapping exercise to make sure everything was consistent. And then as part as the developmental process, we're working through CAHEP now, is we developed a strength and conditioning add-on to the exercise science accreditation. And within that strength and conditioning add-on, there are specific expectations related to the things that are charged within the recommendation. But to what Adam was talking about before, we use those role delineation studies to identify the specific competencies that are necessary, and then they have to identify those within the curriculum. So as Adam said, this is an ongoing developing process. So you're going to see, expectations increasing as we move on, towards that 2030 mark.
Mm-hmm. I would echo all of that. We are in process of moving in that direction. So thank you, Brian, for taking that one.
All right. Let's see. I'm just going through here. This is an interesting one. It's how can there be better, proper vetting of strength and conditioning in the hiring process of strength coaches at all levels? So many hires are made on the basis of relationships to the sport coach instead of ensuring that there's proper education, credentialing, experience fit for the athletic department.
I'm going to hop in there, and I'm going to, wearing my academic hat, we have search and screen committees as a group, and we have stakeholders, from different areas, not just within the department. And I think that's probably a good model that they should, start to look at in these athletic departments, is making sure there's an athletic director involved, making sure there's someone from the medical community involved, making sure that there, is participation, across the strength and conditioning professionals to evaluate and decide on these. Historically, the term the good old boys or good old girls network has been consistent across athletics, and we're seeing, as I stated, and it blows my mind, the number of deaths that are not reported associated with these things. And so it's time just to move the profession forward in a mature way.
And I'll jump in and even add that, for folks that are watching, is to challenge you to write in your job description that it's a requirement, that it's one of the 3 accredited organizations here on this call. We are the highest accredited organizations in the country. So when you hire someone carrying that certification, you're getting someone who's competent and knowledgeable in the skills and assessments needed to do the job correctly and safely.
Thank you. Last question, and this is an interesting one. It's regarding when athletes are injured, involved in clinical medical interventions, that it would include hospitals or a specialist. It's really a return to play question on that, and how does that coordination happen, and how should it happen, and include the strength and conditioning coach in those decisions around ready to return to play.
Well, Graham, from my perspective, it's critical. That's why it's so critical that the athletic training staff and the strength and conditioning staff have a close working relationship and are working together. There's so many critical points when an athlete returns to play, where it goes from a rehabilitation to a return to activity, return to play. And it's that, coordination and communication that drives that successfully. And so I can't think at any time in my career where it's been more critical that, that athletic trainers and strength and conditioning staff work together to make certain that those plans transition well. If not, there can be a significant gap in what happens. And I think it's critical that the strength and conditioning and sports performance professional is part of those discussions.
Others with closing thoughts?
No, I would just echo what Dr. Borges just stated, we have to work together and we have to collaborate when we get the athlete to that point in making those return to play decisions.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We're at time now. Thank you to all of the attendees for joining us. For more information on the Athlete Alive 2025 effort, the interassociation recommendations, or to verify professional credentials, please visit www.usreps.org. And thank you so much to all of our panelists today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.